one of the worst situations to find yourself in is not having thought this stuff through and not being prepared, but entering into the zone where you might be open to a transaction and an offer just kind of appears. And it's actually at a price that you're interested in. As a seller, you're caught flat-footed, and it's really hard to get up to speed fast. My blanket advice always, it doesn't matter, sell or buy side, is make the counterparty your best friend.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Exit Success Podcast. Today, I have Alex Prasad with me, and he is an entrepreneur and business attorney with over a decade of experience in early stage company and M&A law. And what I really like about Alex is his approach to business and working with clients, which is having a human-centric approach. And I believe I heard you say when we talked earlier, deals are 90% human and 10% legal, which I can certainly resonate with and would love to learn more about. So welcome to the podcast, and I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. And yeah, maybe it's 99% human, but at least 90%
I
human
wouldn't disagree.
and 10% legal.
For sure. So yeah, man, tell us a little bit about your background, because you are part of a startup as well as a practicing attorney. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I spend a lot of my time working for a golf technology startup. I love to operate. That's probably my major passion. But my career arc, started as an M&A attorney, and I still practice, and I have that practice with Aegis Law, which is based in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm in Michigan. But as corporate attorneys, we work across border. The litigators take up all the oxygen in the room, Tom.
Yeah.
But these us lowly transactional attorneys exist too, and so like the litigators, they're this court, not that court. That doesn't apply to us. There's a common misconception. So yeah, I think my experiences have provided me kind of a unique perspective on. I consume legal services and I provide them. And I like to tell people, I hate lawyers too. Lawyers are horrible. I say that mostly in jest, but really, truly, there are few. The personality type that, in general, right, is attracted to being an attorney is often kind of the polar opposite of the personality type that's the entrepreneur or the business owner. And can be a good mix, right, or combination. But I know I see a lot of times the business owner operator trying to defer to the attorney, which, yes, they're the expert, but just like any other, the marketing expert, the operations expert, the finance expert, it's only one input into the equation. I think that's something that like you and I kind of resonated on, and obviously your experiences, right, in advising and how to exit and the wealth planning, portion. Only one input, right? If you say this is what you're supposed to do, and it doesn't, align with the goals of the the principal, if you will, principal wins. We're just agents here. So anyway, that's kind of the approach. And in my firm, myself in particular, my firm, we kind of all have that attitude, which is not the main line, or mainstream, right, attitude of attorneys in general, I would say.
Exactly. It's a relationship business, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. So how, depending on who's listening, exiting a business or even buying a business is usually a once in a lifetime thing, but it's not often you get to do it 2 or 3 times. So maybe some folks aren't familiar with the role of an M&A attorney in that process. So how does your role as an M&A attorney fit into the process of selling a business or buying a business? Because some folks, I can say, like they're in a business for 15, 20 years. They've been using an attorney that they've always used for 20 years. And, but they don't have the same skills and expertise in this niche. So can you just dive a little bit more into your role and how you add value to the overall process?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, just generically, like, right, the transaction attorney as opposed to the attorney that you come to for, this guy stole my truck or whatever, or this is, that HR, issue, right? Yeah. So I mean, I like to say, inch wide, mile deep, right? And so we spend probably most of our time on the buy side, actually, but I think most of your listeners are sell side, but we work on both sides, to be clear. And just at this current phase, if you will, most of our clients are on the buy side of businesses that are very similar size to the ones that you work with, these small business, SMBs, right? But small businesses, right? Nothing wrong with that size, by the way. And we can talk about why we actually like that. We resonated on that too, as opposed to bigger and badder, if you will. But yeah, I think you kind of already described it. These transactions are rare unless you're in the space. And this is in no way, meant to like put down or whatever an attorney that you've been working with in the ordinary course stuff. But general corporate counseling is, our phrase for it, is just very different than the transactional phase. The transactional phase is, an inch wide and a mile deep. And so all we do all day, every day, we do GCC stuff too, for sure, but our mainline focus is on those transactions. So um, again, it's a specialized field, if you will. And I have a lot of clients that are repeat buyers, and they always ask me, how do we, make this go faster, right? How can we do more deals faster? We have the capital, we want to deploy it. And they say, well, there's certain things we can do. Here's a list. But the biggest wild card is who seller's counsel is. And it's very binary. If they're a transactional attorney and they get it, we don't have to have any birds and bees conversations or have any conversations about this is what happens in general. Or they're kind of like the attorney, the seller's been using for 20 years, which doesn't mean they're a bad attorney. You don't want me to do your real estate work? Don't understand it. You don't want me to do your estate planning work? Don't understand it. You don't want me to do litigation? Don't understand it. I know this much, but enough to be dangerous, basically. But you do want us to do your transaction because that's what we do all day, every day. And so the inverse is true too. So especially in, quote unquote, smaller deals, again, I say that positively, not negatively, right, to put down those deals. You will get the kind of jack of all trades attorney that will represent in the transaction, and just slows things down because they kind of beg, borrow, and steal from the concepts they're familiar with in estate planning or real estate. You get, concepts like earnest money deposit, which, yeah, but not really in the, I understand it, right? The translation, but it's just not normally, if you will,
Yeah.
normally, or what's market, how it works. So, yeah, I mean, we're hyper focused on, basically, I don't know, a big college football fan, right? Like running the same play over and over and over again, getting really good at where all 22 players are, right, on the field. And then, you come to the line, you can run the same play again, like, oh, something's a little bit different about the defense. You only know that because you've seen the movie, a whole bunch of times, right? So, yeah, having, and I know we'll dive into some of the more substantive things, but having the person who's seen the movie before and can say, I always say the best, and I say this as a CEO, right, or as an entrepreneur, the best input I can get from an expert, a software engineer, CFO, whatever, is I've seen this 10 times. 8 out of the 10 times it worked out this way. 2 out of the 10 times it worked out this way. I recommend the 8 out of 10 times. And then you bounce it against what the principal wants, right? It's like, well, I think we have to do it the 2 out of 10 way, and here's why. Okay, that's probably the riskier path. Here's the best way, or to minimize the risks, if you will, and going left instead of right. That to me is a hallmark of a kind of the right expert, if you will, regardless of what we're talking about, particularly in a transaction. If they can't tell you a story, right, about why, an anecdote about why doing this or that is better or worse, then they might intellectually understand, nothing wrong with that. But I mean, I think you really want the experience. And so that comes from living in the space all day, every day. Why you focus your practice where you do too, right? As opposed to anyone and everyone.
Yeah, for sure. You want someone who's walked the road at least 5 to 10 times. They know, where the potholes are, where the pitfalls can turn up, and they can guide you down that path. And I think going back to again, when we say small business owners, technically that's still a business between 2 and 10 million or 15 to 20 million in
Yeah.
revenue. So I mean, but touching on that real quick, because it's really important, like where our heart is while we're working in our practice, like those folks, in my opinion, need the most help and guidance because it is the owner that's been building his business or her business for 15, 20 years. They don't have millions of dollars saved up in a 401k outside. They've been building it and they're depending on that business, an illiquid asset, which technically it has a less than 20% chance of selling in the market, to turn it into a ticket to get into retirement or to sell and then maybe buy another business. So it's so vital that there's folks out there like you and I and just giving guidance to that area and helping them along that journey because it's complicated. Like I've spoken to some CEOs that are running 15, $20 million businesses. They have no idea how this process even works and
Yeah.
what they should be doing 2, 3 years in advance. So it's so important.
which is not a put down. It's just not what you do all day, and it's a one-off kind of thing, to your point. So yeah, bring in people who have seen those lots of those one-offs, right? Who can provide just a quick story. The reason
Yeah.
that I like operating in this space, it's all kind of after the fact you realize, right? But I have a deal story. It was a huge deal, hundreds of millions of dollars. It was the last company in a portfolio with 2 unicorns. So the give a dang was low, amongst the biggest shareholders, right? And so we got the deal done. It wasn't particularly successful. Only 2 or 3 people, even though big ticket price, right? But so much money had been put in, right? Only 2 or 3 groups really got any dollars out. There's 400 or so shareholders, and so 350 plus got nothing. And I worked the deal. It was based on the West Coast, and I got to write, a letter to 350 plus shareholders saying, hey, thanks for playing the game. You get nothing. And I'm a red-blooded capitalist. I believe in creative destruction. Like, this was a bad deal. There needed to be a reset button, all those things. It didn't feel good. Someone needs to be a litigator. I don't want to be a litigator. Someone needs to write that letter. I just don't want to be the guy doing it. It doesn't turn my crank. On the other hand, exactly this dynamic. And so not only are these deals, all deals are mostly human. The bigger they get a little bit less human, for sure, right? That example in particular. But the people are more human too, and the impact on the people's lives is real and significant. Exactly to your point, you're running a small business, HVAC company, a roofing company, whatever, and your exit, that's the retirement plan. It is not the 401k that you put in, $800 a pay period or whatever in for 30 years. So we feel like we make a real difference. I mean, our own way. My wife's a doctor. She makes like a real difference, right? People, die or not, based on, because she's the anesthesiologist, right? That's a little bit different. That's a lot more tangible. But in our own way, I mean, there's real human impact here. And when we get a deal done, there's a buyer who's maybe starting their entrepreneurial journey. I relate to that. I think that's cool and exciting. And there's a seller who, to your point, achieved that lifelong, right, goal, mission. So this is actually wrote a blog post about, where this is the space, that I prefer. It's not like the biggest and baddest. It's always the most rewarding, basically. So yeah, that's a major motivator, if you will, in getting these things done, because these people really care. When I've worked with publicly traded companies, the bigger, badder clients, people are collecting a paycheck and they go home. Business fails, they get another job. This is very different if you built this company from scratch, if you will. Like, you're in the community, right? Your name's often attached to the business, etc. It can't just go away. Again, not the people in suits, if you will, don't care about their employees, etc. Not what I'm implying, but it's different. There's a different feel to it, and I like that. There's a pressure to it too, but I like that pressure, because there's a reward beyond just the dollars and cents, if you will. You're making a difference.
Yeah. And it affects not just the owners, but the employees too. I mean,
Sure.
again, what's going to happen with their life after they do sell? Do they like the new owner? Do they like the vision, if it's going to change going to that next step? So really big impact. So what are some of the maybe in buying a business too, that I don't want to put that aside, because some folks do
Yeah.
sell and they want to buy with the
Yeah.
proceeds or whatever. But what are the critical steps when you're going through this process to get the deal over the finish line? And there could be a podcast literally just on that question alone, because I'm assuming there's
Sure.
100 landmines. But what are the critical steps that are often overlooked, or mistakes that are made?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and yeah, we could spend 5 hours. Everyone, you can hear the people ending the podcast right now and leaving when I say that, right? We won't spend 5 hours talking about it. I think it ties in this theme. I sound like a broken record, but it really is true and resonates. It's about people more than deal points, etc. So my blanket advice always, it doesn't matter, sell or buy side, is make the counterparty your best friend if you're the principal, right? No attorney, no advisor, broker has ever closed a deal. They don't have the power to do it. They are not the principals. They are agents, right? They are assisting in the deal, but the principals have to decide. Again, my wife's a doctor, so completely different universe, right? And I've multiple times been working on a deal and said, everything's going really well. That scares the heck out of me. She's like, I don't get that. I said, every deal has curveballs, has bumps in the road. And so here's what happens. It's we discover on the buy, a lawsuit that we didn't know was out there. Maybe both sides didn't know. You discover a regulatory, investigation, right, that we didn't know about. Maybe even the seller didn't know about, etc. It doesn't really matter what that context is, but we will discover things. The seller might discover things because they've never gone through the due diligence process before about their own business, right? They're operating it every day. So things will come up. The lender will, go back on their word on a commitment letter or change some material terms. Stuff will happen. But especially on the diligence side, when something comes up, there's really only two reactions. One, especially from the buy side perspective, right, is that's concerning. I'm going to go talk to the seller, right? I don't think they're trying to screw us. I don't think they're trying to hide the ball. But because there's this trust and there's a real relationship between the two parties, I'm just going to call them and find out. I don't have a knee-jerk reaction to hearing about that. The other is a very transactional transaction, if I can say such a thing, right? There's not a lot of trust between the parties, and immediately you jump to, like they're hiding that from us, right? Or again, if there's a strong relationship, you don't jump to the conclusion. You gather the facts first. It doesn't mean that the substantive issue won't be an issue either way, but navigating it, like it kind of either supernovas or it's one of those bumps in the road, right? So that's the number one thing, because it is many of these people one-off. They're not repeat actors, right? If we're talking about private equity firms and the bigger and badder and the same repeat actors, there are some constraints on behavior because we know we're going to see these people again, right, and do another deal. You can't be completely outrageous now if you want to do a deal with them in 6 months or 2 years or whatever, right? But if it really is one-off, there is an instinct sometimes, not with everyone, right, but sometimes to make it very transactional, right? Like, because it's a one-off thing. I don't have to deal with this person again, etc. But I mean, there's stuff to be done after the close. I can go on and on. So I mean, that's number one blanket piece of advice. Regardless of whether you really love the other person or not, make them your best friend. Take them out to dinner, right? Form a real relationship, whether you can't stand them or not. It's kind of the grease that turns the axle, if you will, to get it done. So that's just a blanket piece of advice. And people will skip that step sometimes. And then when the curveballs happen, because they will happen, or the bumper road comes up, because it will come up, there's like not a lot of a safety net there, if you will, right? Because we're already kind of treating each other like robots and not like people. I guess the other thing that I would mention, and it's in the same vein, is it really is about the relationships that make these companies go. So one example is customer concentration. If the seller has key customer relationships, you have to have a strong relationship with the seller. And seller wants this too, by the way. I'm speaking from the buy side just in this, right? But you need a strong relationship with the seller because they have to create a handoff there. I can tell you, it doesn't matter what the contract says. You can have a 5-year contract with the key customer that's 20% of revenue, whatever. If they don't like the new person, it's going to degrade fast. It doesn't matter what that contract says. And trying to force someone to do business with you because a contract says when they don't like you or like it's not a good relationship, story doesn't end well, let me tell you, right? I mean, you might win, but it's a Pyrrhic victory, right? And then for key employees too. I could just probably go on and on, Tom, so I'll cut myself off now. But especially this new FTC rule about non-competes, etc. Even if that's in place, even if you can identify key employees prior and offer them an employment agreement as a buyer, right? And again, seller wants this too, especially if there's an earn out, but that's a different topic of conversation. Right, smooth the transaction. You can't make anyone do anything they don't want to do, even with a legal agreement. That's kind of like a secret that most attorneys won't tell you, right? The piece of paper is not going to make anyone do anything. It might be a hammer later to punish them for not doing the thing they were supposed to do, but it's not going to get them to do it. It's just not. So these key employees, you're never going to identify all of them that are really key, right? But even if you do, so again, it's about the people. I mean, trying to form those relationships in an authentic way, by the way, right? Don't be someone don't be inauthentic. That's gonna you run a runaway there really fast once it's exposed. It was all kind of an act. But you have to be, kind of in it to win it, with the whole of your person, not just right to get the deal done. Even if it's not contractually obligated, the seller, you're gonna want to call the seller, and the seller, you're gonna want to call the buyer and say, hey, it'll help them, right? Yeah. Even if there's not contingent things later, it's just gonna be better for everybody.
Okay, so that was a lot of great information. And keep talking because this is valuable stuff. So let's I want to rehash some. At the end of the day, I mean, seller and buyer, it all comes down to it sounds like just aligning your interests. Like if you're going to be buying a
Absolutely.
business and maybe it's a family business that's selling, like that's not just one person's decision. It's like five people that are probably involved. So maybe
Hmm.
for a buyer to be like, hey, listen, like, what are you trying to get out of this deal? What are you looking for? What do you
Amen.
need? What does your spouse need or your brother-in-law, whoever? Because you got to get everyone on the same page and then meet in the middle. Like if you have to give up a little bit on the other end to make it work, but you got to know what each other want to even make it a success.
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, and behind the curtains, Tom and I have already spoken about some of these things at a very high level, right? But like you're taking the words out of my mouth, right? And we really resonated together on exactly this point. So best friend, advice number one, number two, figure out why they want to do the deal. I mean, that sounds stupid, right? Well, they want money, right? If you're again from the buy side perspective, right? Or seller, they want to buy this business and they want the financial rewards. Yeah, but there's so much more to it. And the reason why, yes, aligned interests, but it is much easier to align interests than I think a lot of people think. But what you have to start with is understanding what the real goals can you define success? So here's what happens. If each side, and by the way, you can't do this for the other person, right? If they don't have a clear vision, you're not going to be able to help form it for them. And that, by the way, is a very early like little warning buoy, right? It's like, oh, okay, this might get hard because they don't really know. I mean, number one thing I'm assessing in a deal is like, do they really know what they want? And will they tell us? If they do, we can navigate together. And asymmetry there is good, not bad, because if
Yeah.
they might not care about what I most want, and I might not care about what they most want, I just give it to them, and then they're super happy, and I get what I want, and they get what they want. But yeah, if you're not clear, so here's what happens on either side. Both sides have to be clear about their real transaction goal. To your point, beyond just money, right? The family interests, etc. We want these people to, these family members to continue to be employed, for a period of time. Well, how long? Right? All those details matter. If you don't, what happens is you end up in positional bargaining mode, and that's not a productive thing. So here's what I mean. Most people think, yeah, negotiation is, you go to the bazaar and the special carpet, right, is $100, and you start arguing with the person over why it should be 70, and then you get it at 75 and you win, right? Yeah, uh, but did you win? I mean, it's kind of gross. I mean, that's the wrong word, right? But that's not a super productive conversation. Is where I go. So what will actually happen in the M&A context is if both parties aren't clear about their goals, haven't communicated them beyond just I want the carpet, you want to right, you want $100. You start positional bargaining on all sorts of stuff with no rubric on what's really important to you and what's not. And it gets kind of contentious kind of fast because everyone, they go, I don't know if I really care. They're not saying this explicitly, right? But what's actually happening is they skip do I care about this issue? Don't know, because I don't have this like clear vision, right? And the transaction goals aren't clear. You don't have to necessarily communicate all of them to the other side, by the way. There's some gamesmanship here, don't get me wrong. And then you just try to carve out, well, if it's better for me, it's worse for them. And then it happens on the other side, right? We're not in a very productive. So you're going to make a list of the 10 issues that remain, and both parties are going to fight to the death to get it to be a little bit better for them. But it doesn't fit overall. I mean, the most productive way to get to the finish line is we've boiled down the issues list to a certain number of things. Both sides have basically rank ordered them. Again, you're not going to communicate the rank order to the other side. You do want better, more favorable terms to you. I understand. But with a rubric of understanding what the other side said is most important to them and understanding what you understand, you know which ones you can give on. And depending on the deal dynamics, you might come into the call and say, hey, look, here's the issues list. We're agreed that we're not agreed on these 10 things. I'm going to go first. These 2 or 3 things, it sounds like these are important to you. They're not. That's fine. They're not important to us. By the way, it takes a special sort of person not to have like built a little bit of karma up and to be a little bit more forgiving. You say, but number 4 is really important to me. If you just gave on 2 or 3 things, again, other people will give you different advice and say, fight on number 1 and try to win. Fight on number 2 and number 3. Why don't you take the 3 biggest wins that are most aligned with your, layering on what the other side wants, right? Because you formed a strong relationship. Win the three most important things, because there are very few things in a deal that are certain. Most of them are speculative. And I'll trade away a speculative deal point. Like, if this happens, then every day of the week, for a real deal point, like, earn out math or working capital adjustments or purchase price, obviously, but hopefully we're past that when you're at the last deal stage, right? So one in the hand is worth two in the bush. And people are all spun up about a hypothetical. Give away on the hypothetical 9 times out of 10, unless you like for sure think it's going to happen, because it's a more remote, it's what's the expected value, right, of each of these items is basically the math that we're doing. And if there's any sort of additional step or probability that's inserted into the equation, it automatically becomes way, way less valuable to you.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. And I think a lot of it falls on us too, because it's in financial planning, when I meet with the client, a business owner, and be like, hey, what are your goals? They don't even know what their goals are. So,
Yeah.
it's shepherding through them through the process of, hey, if you do want to exit or sell, like, what are you looking for us to guide them and help them to understand that. So when you do go to the other side of the aisle, they have some
Yeah.
clarity and kind of know what to expect. And then you can kind of navigate it from there. But you got to have clarity first.
Yeah. What I found, so our roles, a little bit different angles, right? But our roles are to translate the story and the feel that the client tells us into the transactional guts,
Yeah,
right?
that's so talk a
Right.
little bit
So
about that. What do you mean?
yeah, so I mean, the client comes to, well, I could try to pretend to be you. I'll try to pretend to be you, Tom. Right? The client comes to you and say, I've got this, ne'er do well kid. Like, they shouldn't touch the money for a long time. I got this kid who's got, on the straight and narrow. I don't care about the dynamics between the two. In terms of like one will be jealous of the other. Like, doesn't matter to me. This is like more, estate planning, whatever. Right? So I just throw that up on you. And you go, oh, well, there's a trust, right? And here's a trustee who's a neutral, third party, and here's the stipulations that we put on one and not on the other, and here's when the money's released, right? The client's never going to come up with that structure, and that's not their job. That's the job that, the value that you add. And so same with me. When we talk about, I mean, use the example of like contingent payments after closing, right? So earnouts or just holdbacks or escrow amounts, etc. So just to zoom out, right? When we say a deal is $1 million, it's not always $1 million on day one. Sometimes the buyer will pay $900,000 and hold back $100,000 for a period of time, meaning they don't put the money anywhere, right? They have an IOU for later, right? To the seller. Because they're worried about, often indemnification issue or a reps and warranties issue, meaning the promises you make, are these things true or not about the business? We're going to hold money for a period of time, then we'll pay it. Or we might put it in escrow. It's the same concept, but at least we know the cash is there as a seller to a third party. Much preferred escrow over holdbacks. There could be a seller note, right? So that is a debt to be paid that's at least accruing interest from the seller's perspective. Or there could be an earnout, basically where we can't agree on the purchase price. And we're going to come up with some sort of formula to like bridge the gap, right? If the business performs under buyer's management, above a certain threshold, the seller's going to get closer to the price that they wanted. If it performs worse, the buyer's going to get closer to the price that they wanted, basically, right, at a high level. And so in any of those scenarios, though the whole, escrow holdback is obviously less fraught than an earnout scenario, I'm always asking the sell side client, what's the goal financially? Are you happy in our example at $900,000? If you're happy, if you're satisfied, I'm not saying you're over the moon, but like that would have been worth it. I feel good about it. You should feel good about it too. Because that contingent payment, here's the question. If someone already bought the thing from you, what is their incentive to pay you more for it later?
Yeah, and right there, it's like 10 to 20% of the deal is still at risk even after the close. Going into the earnout conversation, or there's different ways to save taxes, like an installment sale. Those payments are not necessarily guaranteed on the back end. You're depending on the new owner to continue to grow the business and fulfill the deal, right?
Yeah.
What would you say?
And even if it is written, I'm going to pay you $25,000 a month every month for the next 6 months. What
So what is that,
happens if
based
they
on a
make a mistake?
handshake? It's not written?
No. I said even if it is written, it is
Oh,
still
okay,
not
okay, okay.
guaranteed. even if it's written.
Yes.
Yes, there's a legal obligation, but yeah, I mean, that's something that just gets missed. Just because it's on a piece of paper really doesn't mean a lot. Again, we discussed earlier, it means you have a hammer, but you still got to use it.
Yeah.
And using the hammer is costly. So buyers missing these payments, that's why that's the way I frame it. If someone already bought something from you, what is their incentive to pay you more money? They might, maybe because they're good people, they're honorable, like, right, they're going to fulfill their word, etc. But you have to understand that logically, he who has gold is king, and they have the gold at this point, and they're not going to give it to, again, the crass realpolitik, right? Math does not point to them paying you more money. It just doesn't. Now, if you form a strong relationship, etc., you're hedging the bet on all those things. But again,
Yeah.
they already have the thing. The money's going into that the business is generating is going accounts they control. If they don't pay you, you saber rattle and then you sue them and you pay money. And even if the agreement says that all your transaction fees, etc., or attorney's fees, etc., will be reimbursed to you if they were found in the wrong, and you put all those protections in place, it's still time, which is your only non-fungible, resource
Yeah.
to go after, and heartache and whatever. So again, if you're happy at $900,000 in our example, you can sleep at night on the 100. I'm not saying to not be upset. You don't get the
Yeah.
100, especially with more of this like escrow holdback guaranteed in quotes, right? Payments. No, you reserve the right to be very upset about 10% of the transaction, not coming out the way. But if you cleared that threshold and you close, you get that money in the bank and you see the wire clear, you have achieved the goal. Now we want more. We all want more. That's great. So anyway, I think that approach, if I can be critical of other attorneys, again, they're the expert and say, well, if that's what it says in the agreement, like, great, but now let's apply it to the real world.
Yeah.
And that speaks to, we talk about complexity a little bit, in other conversations. If the agreement's too complex to be described in 2 or 3 sentences, it's not going to govern anyone's behavior.
Yeah. And
It's
I would
very hard.
imagine,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would imagine, I mean, I try to explain estate planning with different trusts and moving money here and there. And some look at me with their eyes are glossing over. Like, you have to draw pictures. This is what I do, create image
Yeah,
and really explain it on a fifth grade level.
yep.
Otherwise, nothing happens. Like, it's paralysis analysis. Sellers will walk away from a deal. I feel like not to mention the complexity, but then there's the emotion on top of it.
Mhm.
That causes even more difficulty. But keeping things simple is going to be huge, I think, to get things over the finish line.
Yeah, there's 2 ways that things get complex too fast. One is there's not enough resources, money, so you have to like bridge the gap and you start to do weird stuff.
Hmm.
2 is the goals aren't clear. If you're clear about your goals, you can get to the solution usually in a fairly straightforward way. Yeah, there's another party to negotiate with, but at least you're clear there. But if you're not, then you do the positional bargaining thing we talked about earlier. You make it more complex on each of these points because each side's trying to eke out a scenario where it's like 1% better for them without the vision of the whole picture. So yeah, simplicity is your friend. Again, to use the earn out or the holdback or escrow example, if it's really clear what the conditions are, let's just use this example of a $10,000 payment every month for 10 months is how we get that extra $100,000, and it's in black and white. I'm supposed to pay you on the 15th of the month, $10,000. Doesn't matter how nefarious people are, that's kind of a hard one to wiggle out of, despite this whole I already bought it, concept. Like, there's not a lot of room there to operate. And again, not to like take a dismal view of humanity, etc., right? Like, the first thought's like, oh man, I already got the thing, do I really have to pay this? Then you read it, if it's really black and white and clear, 99% of people are gonna be like, yeah, like, I gotta pay. Like, there's just nowhere to tap dance here, right?
Yeah.
But the more complicated it gets, again, because of this external, it's not about the people, it's about the real, interests, right? Like, they already got the thing. They don't want you to sue them, and they want to maybe keep the relationship good for a variety of reasons. But you can't dangle real money in front of people from an incentive perspective and not have people at least consider, well, what if I don't have to pay, right, part with that money? So if you get into an earnout scenario, it gets complex fast. Again, even if both sides are honorable, etc., if it's complex, we might do the math differently. And we have tools in our toolkit to bridge these gaps, but just understanding each step that we take, it becomes more perilous basically down the path. So yeah, if it's not simple, if people can't describe the deal to you or the deal point in 2 or 3 sentences, the principles that, not the experts, the principles, right? It's not going to every day when they wake up govern their behavior. If I know I got to pay you $10,000 on the 15th of the month for the next 10 months, that's pretty clear. I keep that in my head, and I got to know I have the cash somewhere, right, to make that payment. If it's, well, if the company hits a certain threshold and it's between this and this, then maybe, sure, it could still govern my behavior. That's what I agreed to, etc. But there's a lot greater chance we're going to argue about how I calculated these things, whether I really owe it to you or not. And again, you're relying kind of on the honor of the buyer in that point to put forth a good faith effort to do the math and let the chips fall where they may, as opposed to do the math in a way that's better for them. So again, I don't think most of the deals that we see, you're not seeing earnouts as a general rule. When you end up there, if you're good with the $900,000, we're playing this fun game on the $100,000, fine. But if you really think the deal's only worth it if you get the full $1 million, you don't want that exposure. We're violating your kind of core goals.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. I was talking to two owners of a business and going through explaining the different ways you can leave, and mentioned an earnout. Like, what's the likely chance you're going to want to stick around and work for the new owner? It's always never. And then it's kind of setting expectations. Well, how often are deals all cash and done and ready to go?
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess in this space, I mean, we do a lot of SBA 7A deals, right? So if you count
Okay.
that as all cash, which is,
So
I'm
so
changing your
explain
prompt.
explain that
Yeah.
explain that for the listeners. SBA 7A. Well, what does that mean for the
Yeah, so
listeners?
the SBA 7A program, it's a loan program where the Small Business Administration guarantees up to 90% of the value of the loan for a private lender. So they're the backstop, and it's meant to encourage loans in this lower space.
Gotcha.
Whole different rant on the policy goals, et cetera, and whether it's necessary. But in the infinite wisdom of Congress, you read between the lines of that sentence, right? We needed to incentivize these loans, and it's a huge program and does a lot of good, by the way. So without being snarky, right? So there are a bunch of different banks that kind of specialize in this, and some of the biggest banks do it too. Sidebar, highly recommend you get one of these banks that's doing hundreds and hundreds of these, as opposed to ones that do it just like opportunistically one off for all sorts of reasons we talked about in terms of experts, right? So I think the limit's $5.5 million of total transaction size, and you got to fit into the box to be sure, right? So in these deals, if you're saying all cash means the financing plus, it's like 10 to 20% equity injection by the buyer to get across the finish line. Most of the deals fall in that category. That's obviously not all cash. Yet pretty rare that there's an all cash buyer that just has all the 100% of the transaction value and says, here you go. Most often what we're seeing is a combination of seller's notes. So the seller's financing a portion of the deal, and that's my $10,000 on the 15th, plus interest, right? Every month for whatever period of time, plus the SBA, cash injection, if you will, to get the deal done. So you think of it like, what's a down payment on the house that you need to make, plus what is the mortgage company, going to finance, right? There's a parallel there for sure. But you can't do earnouts in the SBA 7A context. So you'd have to be a different sort of deal structure to even get to that, to many of the contingent payments that we were kind of talking about earlier. So yeah, if you're in a deal, basically, if you're selling your business for $5.5 million or less, I'd almost expect it to be an SBA 7A finance deal. Because again, if you're the buyer, why would you take 100% of the risk? You can take less of it, right? You can leverage your assets. And then you actually have a much narrower field in terms of potential deal points that could come up. And there's these limits on the flexibility you have in structuring the deal if you're participating in the SBA 7A program.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good information. Yeah, and what kind of coming to an end here? What are 2 to 3, I don't know, points or any words of wisdom to leave to any owner that's thinking about going down this path? Is there any best way for them to prepare, get more knowledge on it, or what are like the 1 or 2 things they should just focus on to help start thinking about the process?
Yeah, well, I mean, the self-serving answer is talk to Tom and Alex, right?
Well, yeah. Reach out.
Um,
I'll make sure to have
but
Alex's info. Yep.
yeah, yeah. But really, I- it's a big event for any seller. It doesn't matter if it's your fifth business, whatever. It's still a big event. And if you think about the preparation that went into your wedding, or picking up other big life events, like, you should treat it similarly. Well, let's not talk about wedding planning, right? It's been enough years. The scar tissue is basically gone. But uh, so it needs to get the attention that it deserves. If you work this long and the goal has been to exit, I don't want to be the guys like, eat your vegetables, right? But this isn't really eat your vegetables. This is like, get out the bowl and scoop the ice cream, right? I mean, this is dessert. I mean, this is this is an exciting thing, but you're gonna
For
put the
sure.
effort in to make it taste as good as possible. Basically, put toppings on it, go to town, right?
I love that. Yeah.
So there's uh yeah, to do it right, to smooth out. There's still gonna be bumps in the road, no matter how well you prepare, no matter how far in advance, etc. Um, but kind of ironically, one of the worst situations to find yourself in is not having thought this stuff through and not being prepared, but entering into the zone where you might be open to a transaction and an offer just kind of appears. And it's actually at a price that you're interested in. As a seller, you're caught flat footed, and it's really hard to get up to speed fast. Keep the buyer's attention, clean some things up, get them into the right place and the data, all that work. So I would just encourage, if it's in a 5-year, time horizon, spend a little bit of time thinking about it. Talk to a person or two that's seen the move, a peer, right? Someone in the business that has exited, but begin to put it on your radar, at least to the point where you can define your transaction goals.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a 2-second story. I have a peer in my entrepreneurial realm that was talking about, in one of my kind of mastermind groups. He gets approached all the time for takeout offers, right? What should he do with these offers? And kind of the group was giving him experience shares and advice. And I just said, do you know what you want? He's like, nope. I said, well, I don't know if there's any more conversation to be had. If you can define that,
Start
as a
there.
starting point, you could just say, hey, thanks for your interest. Here's my goals, right? Can you meet them? Yes or no? Whether it's price, whether it's deal terms, whatever. They eliminate a lot of noise, because a lot of people say, no, that's not the way we would do it. Okay, great. Then I'm not going to do a deal with you. I'm not in a hurry, right? So just thinking about it, right, which sounds like generic, kind of silly advice. But if you get caught flat-footed and you just kind of scramble to try to meet, opportunistically, again, I don't want to be like preachy, right? I mean, you're going to probably say the same thing about,
Same thing.
defining goals. Right, same thing. Yeah, but you'll end up, doesn't mean you won't get the deal done, right? Doesn't mean this is all about probabilities, right? But if it's not on your mind, and you don't even in your head, not even written down on a whiteboard or a notepad or whatever, have those goals in mind, you'll end up in a more complex kind of positional bargaining, dare I say, incoherent conversation, right?
Yeah.
With the buyer. And you might still end up there, by the way. And if you do, great. Tom's a type A person. I'm a type A person. We just like to be in control to the extent that we can be, and prepare and plan to the extent that you can.
Well, and I get it. Like, you're running a business, you're juggling 1,000 things, throwing a
Yeah.
family and kids on top of that. Like, you're putting out fires all day long. I understand that, but um, that's why a part of our job is to tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, remember this? Let's start thinking about this. Have some kind of an idea of a vision. Otherwise, you're going in blind, right? We all have blind
Yeah. And
spots,
yeah.
and
And this is it, right? I mean, this is the moment. If this is the most important transaction in your career arc, we're assuming this seller, it's probably worth some effort up front, right? I mean, it's a lot of effort to run your business every day. So
yeah,
yeah, of all the priority, and I get it. Everyone who's an expert, right, in whatever, always says, "Oh, you got to pay attention to my thing. That's really
yeah,
super important." And like, I think this one though is the most important. I could make the argument, right? Um, of all the things to think about, right, the biggest
yeah.
check you'll ever get,
The
the
largest
conclusion of
financial
the,
transaction of your life.
yeah, right, yeah, that one seems to be high on the list in terms of time, effort, energy, focus. Um, yeah. Uh, so yeah, there's no such thing as too early, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know when the opportunistic thing And I guess maybe the other point is anyone who runs a business understands, like, it's never gonna be perfect. You're never gonna be completely prepared. I
No.
don't think either of us are saying go stop what you're doing, right, and try to do every possible thing in anticipation. No, it's like at least have thought it through, get some building blocks in place, have a vague sense, more specifics better, but some sort of sense of where you want to end up, informed by good experts, if you will. That at a minimum is sufficient, and that's not a huge time suck. And then you're just ready if the unanticipated knock comes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's literally a matter of just blocking out some time in your day. This is why I try to keep these podcasts pretty short, hour maximum, on the way into the office, on the way leaving to the office, to start digesting the information, hearing some of the terminology, because it can get very complex. But the more you know and more you're aware of, you can navigate that journey a little bit better. So
Yeah.
well, hey man, we're almost up to an hour. That was wildly fast. Lots of great information, Alex. Can you just leave maybe some places of contact? Where can folks find more information about you, learn more about your business, etc.?
Yeah, I'm sure in the description, right, of the podcast,
Yep,
there'll be
I'll be
links,
in there. Yep.
etc. So we'll put it there, and I'll point people there. But yeah, happy to help in any way possible. And yeah, lend an ear, be a sounding board, whatever. It doesn't have to lead to a transaction. And at this stage of my life, I'm just happy to help and meet more entrepreneurs, because it's a virtuous cycle. So yeah, please reach out. I have my blog, which I post weekly, just kind of whatever's on top of my mind in terms of these things, and being an entrepreneur and the lawyer, right? So and I read a lot about bad lawyers, basically, and what you look for in a good lawyer. It doesn't have to be me, right? But like, here's the things you should look for, in the good advisor, because I've seen good and bad, and others can judge whether I'm any good, but I can tell you some things, and I've seen some stories. So, yeah, so check it out, and yeah, we'd be happy to chat.
Great, man. Well, hey, everybody, I'll include the links to the blog, website, social media stuff. It'll all be in the description. Check it out if you are going to be heading down this path, or at least start to get educated on it. And thanks again, Alex. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it as well.
All right, you take care.